The Witcher 3 Complete Edition was broadly a success when it landed on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S late last year. The ray-traced ambient occlusion, the RT global illumination were both excellent, and to play The Witcher 3 at 60 frames per second on PS5 was a real breakthrough on the Sony console side, which till that point had been stuck at 30 FPS max. But certain aspects of The Witcher 3's re-release fell short of a true next-gen experience, specifically in its frame rate, and also stability, where crashes were a big issue on all consoles. The quick summary: PS5's ray tracing mode often dropped under 30 FPS, quite substantially in fact in Novigrad, while its 60 FPS performance mode fared much better. And then on Series X, we had a kind of reverse problem: a better optimized 30 FPS ray tracing mode, but then a 60 FPS performance mode that fell below PS5's level in areas like Novigrad. Coming to the rescue then for PS5, Series X, S and PC is patch 4.01, an update that promises specific visual and performance tweaks. So here are the key bits in the patch notes. On next-gen consoles, it boils down to optimisations to the ray-traced global illumination, which should, in theory, benefit the frame rate. And secondly, for console, we're promised high-quality screen space reflections on PS5 and Series X too. As for PC, well, Alex Battaglia is handling the PC changes later in this very video, with a cameo appearance. The promise though in the notes is of a new performance mode for the ray-traced global illumination that aims to boost frame rates by sacrificing the RTXGI's range and precision, plus a fix to its SSR setting. So a lot to take in there, I realise, console and PC all in one video, but I'll say up front, having focused on just PS5, Series X and S myself this week, which we'll be focusing on first, I've had no crashes so far since installing the update, which is a good start really, given that was issue number 1 at launch. But what of the frame rate on patch 4.01? Is it improved on PS5, Series X and S as CDPR promise, or are some modes in fact downgraded from the launch build? Let's find out. To kick off then, let's focus on those visual upgrades mentioned in the notes. CD Projekt Red's notes mention improved SSR, screen space reflections on console. Not that there was any real problem with them before patch 4.01, but now apparently they're even better. Again, this only applies to PS5 and Series X in their ray tracing modes, where a newer, superior form of SSR is enabled, so Xbox Series S doesn't get any benefit here, in other words, and the upgrade is pretty self-evident. On patch 4.01, reflections appear at a higher resolution on Series X here, for example, more accurate, sharper and cleaner. I'll also say the visual makeup is otherwise unchanged from the launch build. In terms of native resolutions, yes, PS5 and Series X continue to target 1440p in the ray tracing mode, and target 4K in their performance modes, with dynamic scaling in place for both. Though the key point is this SSR technique isn't active in the performance mode and only on the ray tracing mode. But yes, otherwise, shadow quality, textures, and draw distance settings are the exact same on patch 4.01 on both PS5 and Series X. So ultimately, the SSR upgrade is the most substantial update visually. And you know what? Again, I'd have loved to have seen ray-traced reflections here, but this even more improved SSR approach is definitely welcome. Anything else? Actually, one thing, before we get to the performance. To improve the frame rate on the 30 FPS ray tracing modes on both consoles, which weren't great on either PS5 or Series X, something had to give visually. On update 4.01, the patch notes mention optimized ray-traced global illumination, which appears to take a similar approach to PC's new ray-traced global illumination performance mode. All of which means, to claw back performance, the ray tracing for GI on console is adjusted, and so in this snapshot, both consoles now appear to have slightly less accurate coverage for the GI. Note in this tavern, for example, before the Blood and Wine expansion, the floor is less thoroughly shaded. Switching between the launch build and patch 4.01, the global illumination is applied with less accuracy now, and crucially, less range to the distance. all of which causes missing patches of coverage in light bounce on the floors here, but ultimately it's still in effect. And this is the price to claw back performance, a tighter lock at 30fps on Series X and PS5. To kick off, let's start with the good news, the ray tracing mode. On PS5 and Series X, the issue on the launch build was a struggling 30fps reading in the ray tracing mode, especially for Sony's console, which often held in the mid-20s. It was actually quite hard to recommend on PS5 at launch, and rarely did it hit 30fps in Novigrad or busy outdoor segments. And, well, patch 4.01 goes some way to fix that. Actually, I'm genuinely impressed by the uptick in performance here. It's not perfect, I'll say that up front. I mean, there are still dips just under 30fps when the Red engine is taxed with these inner city sprawls, but the changes to the ray trace global illumination do actually have an impact, with a 3 to 4 FPS gain in most areas. Side by side, the comparisons between the launch build and 4.01 shows quite a marked difference, and we're now getting a much tighter lock at 30fps. Whether it's the Novigrad run on horseback or even battling bandits, PS5's at least closer to the mark. For PS5, there's still lingering issues, of course. Major cutscenes, for example, with lots of alpha effects, drop us into the high 20s still, and yes, Crookback Bog is still consistently shy of a 30fps lock, but it's getting there, step by step. It's an upward trajectory for PS5. Now, personally speaking, I'm still only playing The Witcher 3 on its performance mode right now, since the high input latency of the ray tracing mode and those remaining sub 30 drops are still a pretty big distraction for me, but your mileage may vary. Which is a shame because the ray tracing extras, plus the better SSR on the ray tracing mode, are gorgeous. Now, if we switch over to a similar test on Xbox Series X's ray tracing mode, again comparing the launch build with patch 4.01, we also see a big upgrade. The fact is, Series X was generally better at locking at 30fps in most areas, in battle, in cutscenes, so in those cases, we just get served the same old 30fps line as before. But, and this is a big but, Novigrad City is now vastly improved on patch 4.01. Novigrad's Hierarch Square, with all the performers in the center, was an unusual problem area for Series X and dipped even below PS5's level at launch. As for the latest patch, 4.01, well, here we get a huge performance boost by up to 4 or 5 FPS, which is just incredible. The heavy bustle of the Hierarch Square isn't 100% there, but it's a real exception, in that it pushes Series X to this sub 30fps drop. But as for every other area, honestly, it's just superb. The route uphill in Novigrad, for example, and even the infamous Crookback Bog now run at 30fps, so good news all round for both PS5 and Series X. The ray tracing mode does take a visual hit, but those gains in frame rate are really well worth it. As for comparing the two consoles directly on patch 4.01, well, this is the situation right now. I think it's pretty straightforward, in that Series X still has this clear, pretty consistent lead, except now the advantage is maybe less pronounced on 4.01. The gap is narrowing. You'll still see a divide in the readings most starkly in the Novigrad route, putting Series X ahead by 3 FPS, so overall, Microsoft's machine is much more enjoyable now as a 30fps experience, and while we're here, a quick note on Xbox Series S's own 30fps quality mode. Series S ran beautifully at 30fps at launch and still runs as smooth as ever on the new update. The only drawback there is the continued lack of ray tracing features, but performance is still as strong as before. Nothing to report then, and all the focus really is on the two premium consoles. For all the benefits of update 4.01, there is also some bad news. The ray tracing mode is improved, yes, but the downside is that the 60fps performance modes on both PS5 and Series X are now worse, and significantly so on Xbox Series X around Novigrad. And I'll say up front, the cause isn't exactly clear either. The side-by-sides before and after the patch show no obvious changes to its visual settings, so starting off with Series X as an example, the the Novigrad run shows a drop by as much as 8 or 9 frames per second on the new patch. For the entire route, by foot or horseback, the drop-off is impossible to ignore now. Frustratingly, in many areas where 60fps was possible at launch on Series X, it's now closer to the 50fps line. And, likewise, battles outdoors are now missing that tight 60fps lock on Series X too. All of which means, if you're struggling to use the 30fps ray tracing mode for any reason, the performance mode is becoming a less appealing backup option as of the new patch. Certainly 50 to 60fps is still viable, especially on a VRR supporting display, and I will say most areas outdoors beyond Novigrad still run at 60fps on Series X, but there's a sense we've lost a chunk of performance here in a crucial segment of the world without any real benefit. Next along is PS5 on its 60 frames per second performance mode. Interestingly, most of the Novigrad route is actually identical between the launch build and patch 4.01. Especially once we hit the Hierarch Square stress point, the performance level is squeezed to a matching 53 FPS here. So at bare minimum, it's unchanged on PS5, no improvement. The problem? That'll be the areas outside the city. The battles with the bandits now run at a significantly lower frame rate now, by as much as 10 FPS. Even simple horseback routes as well, in the countryside, take a hit to the mid-50s, where before PS5 was a locked 60 FPS. Again and again, I noticed this was no accident. Patch 4.01 genuinely downgrades the frame rate, and we lose ground even in cutscenes. So yes, if you've noticed your frame rate dropping more often on PS5 since the patch, you're not mistaken. As far as the consoles are concerned, PS5 and Series X, there's a sense we've taken one step forward and one step back. Patch 4.01 boosts the frame rate in the ray tracing modes, but lowers it in the performance modes. And comparing the performance modes on both consoles together on the latest patch, the summary is this for 60fps play. PS5 continues to run better around Novigrad, while outdoors areas, battling and cutscenes run better on Series X. Hopefully, CDPR has a way to restore it to the performance level at launch, because for PS5 at least, it was much easier to recommend. And I'll take this moment to mention the Xbox Series S version as well. The 60fps performance mode is neither better nor worse on the new patch from what I've tested, and it still runs at a dynamic 1080p. Sadly, Series S still struggles to hit the top 60fps mark around Novigrad. Beyond that though, as before, it's a reasonable showing with drops in a few select areas. But yes, that's the console situation. But what of PC? Well, who better to ask directly than Digital Foundry's PC specialist Alex Battaglia. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks for the handoff, Tom, but unfortunately, there's really not much to talk about regarding the PC version with this most recent Witcher patch. The few things that it does are appreciated, but it's underwhelming still as a total package and is still deeply flawed. Let's go into the changes though, specifically the inclusion of a performance mode for RTXGI. I called this out recently on DF Direct and in my 13 ways to end lousy PC ports video. Basically, the original game's RTXGI was a simple on and off toggle with a baseline quality that was much too heavy on the GPU, specifically mid-range GPUs, and was actually much higher quality than the RTXGI found on the console versions according to CD Projekt Red themselves. People had to resort to using mods to downgrade RTXGI quality to make it more usable on lower end RT hardware. Well, now with the official performance option in-game for RTXGI, it basically does the same thing as that mod, which degrades RTXGI quality. In an indoor scene like this one, typically it means more light leaking is visible. Check out the door frame here. Notice how the performance version of RTXGI on that door frame is glowing white as though it was outdoor, even though it is indoor. That is because the density of probes is lessened and RTXGI results for indoor areas are not as accurate. For outdoor scenes, the differences from the new performance mode are basically that things in a distance have less RTXGI coverage, like this building here, where we can see that the performance mode has the building being an ambient gray color with little shading, whereas in the quality mode, there's a semblance of darkening and shading there, better as the RTXGI probes extend further into the distance in that quality mode. On a lower spec RT GPU like the RTX 2060 Super though, this pays dividends, where the quality mode before would be unplayable, far below 30 FPS in a realistic user scenario, whereas now it's perfectly viable option for those who want to play the game with a 30 FPS cap on a lower end GPU like this one. And it also has huge benefits in visuals in comparison to being off. The other positive news from this patch is that the game runs better on average at the same settings while CPU limited, while looking the same as well too. While running through the game's heaviest CPU limited area in Novigrad City Center, I was able to measure a 10% performance improvement on the Ryzen 5 3600 when it was CPU limited without ray tracing on. Nice little upgrade there for free that helps the game get closer to 60 FPS more often on the CPU, but as you can tell, it's still incredibly CPU heavy, not always hitting 60 FPS. And still, if you're to turn on ray tracing on the CPU, it'll be woefully far from 60 FPS. On a larger CPU with ray tracing that's much faster, the Core i9-12900K, I measured only a 7% performance uplift from doing that same run versus the original game version at the same settings. So it seems this faster CPU with RT on sees less of a benefit from this new patch. And that's about it. Everything else I considered bad in the original release is mainly still there. The game still has shader compilation stutter that should not be there at all, like when I use the Witcher potion that you're seeing right here for the first time. It stutters. The visual issues are still there, such as how water streams in the game don't have the proper surface normal to distort the reflections on them correctly, or how the ray trace shadows show incredible pop-in close to the camera, where trees animate and then stop animating very near to the player camera. So the issues are still there, and although the game runs faster now on the CPU, it's still very poorly optimized for multi-core CPUs. It still is underutilizing the potential threads and cores in modern processors. So it's not good, it's just not as bad as it was before, and that's really enough for me for now on this topic. So back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Alex. So, overall, the turnout for both PC and console shows a mixture of fortunes on patch 4.01. It's now nearing 2 months since The Witcher 3's revamped Complete Edition came out, and while ray tracing performance is certainly improved now thanks to the new global illumination mode on PC and console, it's clear other issues remain. The PC version's shader compilation issue continues, for example, and on the console side, again, ray tracing is more performant at a tighter 30 FPS, but in the process, somehow, the 60 FPS mode is downgraded with a lower frame rate. It's hard to step away from this new update fully satisfied then. The improved SSR is a nice touch, and stability issues appear to be addressed now. Beyond that, we'll just have to see if there's any more major updates in store down the line to address the frame rate. But that's all from myself and Alex. If you did find this video useful, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.